Have you ever heard of furries? Do you want to? From pooping on sandwiches to fighting Nazis with diapers to blowing their entire life savings on fetish art, furries online have been as trailblazing as they've been controversial. And throughout this year, I've been hard at work documenting the weirdest, nastiest DeviantArt furry incidents I could find. So as my way of saying thank you to you guys for such an incredible first year on YouTube, here are the craziest DeviantArt furry stories so far. Have you ever heard a seemingly innocent phrase that you just knew meant something evil? Maybe Tub Girl or Lemon Party or the Furry Cheesegrater? Then you may just be the victim of the darkest image in furry history. In 2007, one artist posed the question that would change the world. What would happen if you put a cheese grater inside your own butt? The answer resulted in a drawing so universally feared that it only survives through word of mouth, and any new links to it are quickly deleted. But why? How bad could it possibly have been? And how did it get the artist that made it effectively booted off the internet?
This is the mystifying lore of the Furry Cheesegrater.
It all begins in 2007. YouTube is barely in its infancy, the first iPhone hits the market, and Nancy Nation is only getting started. But in a lesser known corner of the internet lived the then poorly understood furry community. And all of their hard work towards mainstream acceptance would be utterly destroyed on April 20th of 2007. That day, for seemingly no reason at all, a user on adult furry website E621 posts the fetish art that will live in infamy. A rather plain digital illustration of a ferret, fox, raccoon-looking creature upside down, crying and bleeding, with an unknown third party rapidly removing a cheese grater from between his legs. The comments exploded with hatred and ironic worship because one thing was perfectly clear: nobody liked this. But problems were already beginning to form. While dozens of users begged for the image to be taken down since it was not only hurting their eyes but their reputations, the original uploader was an admin, so he didn't have to listen to anybody. And he didn't. And while this could have just quietly lived and died on this one website, beneath anyone's notice, several users had quietly saved the image and started posting it where it really didn't belong.
A quick detour to 2005.
Dragoneer, known also as Sean-Paul Pichet, joins a relatively new website called Fur Affinity. After falling in love with the community, Dragoneer would take ownership of the site just 2 years later. Together with artist Canine, Dragoneer came up with Fender, the ferret-fox hybrid, Fur Affinity's new official mascot and soon-to-be victim of a kitchen appliance. So by the time the faded artwork had been uploaded, Fur Affinity was one of the most recognizable faces of furries online. And though it may have set out to just be a regular art site, it was almost immediately overwhelmed with tons of porn. But you may be asking yourself, this was 2007. Shock media was huge back then. It took virtually no effort to find everything from people eating poop to losing their own heads. And other than the obvious, what made this drawing that bad? It's not real. Surely there was worse stuff out there. And there was. But here's why that didn't really matter. Quick internet history. If you don't know, Encyclopedia Dramatica, ED for short, was a satirical Wikipedia-style website with articles about every aspect of internet culture. It still technically exists, but it goes down constantly. And like 4chan, being featured on this website in any capacity was very bad news for you. For obvious reasons, the cheese grater image was prominently displayed on articles about furry activities and online sex weirdos. Rumors exaggerating the content of the image were piling up into a living legend that was monstrous compared to the actual thing. So this just wasn't adding up. This was not the worst furry artwork by even a mile. So why the hype? To answer that, we have to travel 1 year back to the GOAT. C. Shock images need no introduction, and I'm not giving you a deep dive, but it's important to understand that furries, regardless of what you may personally believe about them, use the internet much like anyone else. So it only follows that furries would have their own universe of shock image. And to briefly go over the more infamous ones, in no particular order: Sandy Cockbore, Spyro Subway, Two Babies, One Fox, also known as Bench Tails, Cars Banging Dragons, dragons banging cars, the copypasta about Vaporeon, a bizarre quantity of raccoon gore. Keep that one in mind. And Dorses. And the uniting factor between these, Goatsy, and the Cheesegrater? It's mostly fetish stuff. While there's no shortage of fetish art on the internet, the artwork that you see in memes is usually the stuff that avoids immediate detection. Inflation, transformation, the Wonder Bread guy, and much like the GOAT of all shock images, the Cheesegrater hits several emotional highs at the same time. It's gory, it's gay, it's furry, it's deeply entrenched in a subculture, and it was potentially many people's first involuntary exposure to sexualized gore. And over the next 11 years, the Cheesegrater image stuck, becoming the single most downvoted furry art of all time. Just to put this in perspective for you, E621 hosted 1.5 million images of furries putting things inside their ass when this happened. People made fan art, the word Cheesegrater was its own meme now, thanks in part to a copypasta so disgusting that if I read it to you, my channel would be deleted. But that backstory, much like the mythos surrounding this drawing, was just made up by a random person. But between the image itself, the shaky reputation of the community, and the borderline obsession people on 4chan and Encyclopedia Dramatica had with documenting cringe and gore on the internet, the Cheesegrater was simply too good to pass up. Cringe culture wouldn't even be relevant for another 10 years, but there was absolutely a growing appetite for pointing and laughing, especially at furries. But how exactly is it sexual? Calling this a fetish is a tall order when there's so much edgy art for edge's sake, so let me prove it to you. First up, the blood, humiliation, and disfigurement largely fall under the umbrella of Guro, which is an adult fascination with gore and mutilation. As of filming, E621 hosts no fewer than 14,000 images tagged as gore, so while this is by no means a popular fetish, it's definitely thriving. Second, while extremely poorly documented, there have been several notable instances of cheese-related freak phenomena. In 2013, a very normal DeviantArt user, likely inspired by the Cheesegrater image, wrote a fanfiction about real-life YouTube duo Dan and Phil using a cheese grater to create bacon bits out of Phil's hog. In 2014, a Philadelphia man labeled the Swiss cheese pervert pled guilty to indecent exposure after he was caught approaching random women with a slice of cheese and asking them if they wanted to watch him rub it on himself. What did he mean by this? In 2018, a German man was found covered in cheese and dead inside of a plastic bag. It was ruled an autoerotic accident. And beyond that, what few blogs exist about cheese and/or Cheesegrater fetishes tend to either be total word salads or completely inactive. r/Quesosexuals is without content, and one of the only relevant articles about a cheese fetish clearly delineates that it is simply too obscure to be its own thing. But let's not kid ourselves here. This has very little to do with cheese and very much to do with the prevalence of shock jock behavior in the late 2000s and early 2010s internet. Most likely, the appeal of this image for people who truly get off to this stuff is the use of a dangerous object in such an intimate, humiliating, and painful way. Which brings us back again to E621 and 4chan. While E621 is no stranger to some pretty extreme content, it does come down hard on those who break the rules. Entire fetish categories and specific users have been blacklisted from the site for much less. And up until 2006, 4chan and 7chan, to a much lesser extent, were more than willing to host the content that E621 considered too far. Although, fun fact, there was a period of time where users on 4chan were so fed up with furry posting that they kept spamming threads with images of trains until the furries fled to 7chan, among other reasons. The Cheesegrater, essentially, was a perfectly engineered shock image. Unsuspecting, known by one seemingly innocuous word, largely unknown outside the furry fandom, and frightening enough for normies without crossing over into real-life gore or illegal imagery. So with all this said, where the hell did it go? In 2018, over a decade after the original upload, artist CB successfully filed a takedown claim and finally got the image nuked for good. But this wasn't without consequence. CB's reputation had been significantly damaged, inextricably linked to this one artwork. And whether it was due to blowback or through personal choice, CB removed virtually all of their artwork from the internet and vanished without much of a trace. And the uploader of the post that started it all, an admin named Arcturus, had suffered so much unrelated controversy in the following years that he too was eventually banned off the site. And it is kind of fucked up that Arcturus refused to take the image down, even though it wasn't his to post, for as long as he did. But somewhat unsurprisingly, the takedown didn't make the Cheesegrater any less relevant. And no sooner was the original post gone than dozens of reposts on various subreddits and image boards sprang up in its place. Fender, the Fur Affinity mascot, doesn't seem to have been permanently traumatized from this experience. Although I suspect that many furries, Dragoneer included, may have taken issue with such a depiction. And on a separate note, as for Dragoneer, his lifetime commitment to the furry world actually recently came to an end due to his untimely passing. And while Fender wasn't his most important contribution, it was undoubtedly iconic. And unfortunately, this is basically everything we know. In spite of the massive, bloody internet footprint of this image, very little documentation remains. The idea of a ferret fox raccoon with a Cheesegrater wedged up his rear ended up being 1,000 times more mimetic than the drawing could ever be, which is usually how these things go. Although furries today are by no means mainstream, their online reputation has significantly improved in spite of decades of controversy, this one included. And as for the posters who gifted us this abomination, there have been very few developments in CB's or Arcturus's ends, which is just as well, because deadass, this topic has been incredibly grating. This has been Bad Art History. Between Jared Fogle, a 9/11 hoax, and meat of no known origin, you'd think Subway had seen it all, until the 4chan furry poop sandwich of 2012. That year, one furry asked the question on everyone's mind. What would happen if you ordered poop at Subway? The answer came in the form of a fetish drawing so offensive, people upload it in pieces so they don't have to look at it directly. So who would make this? How on earth is the Dookie sandwich connected to singer-songwriter CeeLo Green? And why does the internet have such a long history of furry poop incidents? This is the craptastic story of the Spyro Subway image. This is Bad Art History. Our tale begins in the sleepy town of Rolla, Missouri, specifically the local Rolla subreddit. On October 26, 2012, a malicious Redditor, though I repeat myself, inexplicably posted this illustration of beloved video game character Spyro the Dragon making a shit sandwich at Subway while his pal helps him by dropping a comically huge log. Looking on with horror and disinterest is a backyardigan and two assorted furries. And in the foreground, Subway, eat fresh. And when people saw this, they lost their minds. Users begged for the image to be taken down, threatened to kill themselves, and one even personally condemned the Redditor to hell. But what these poor saps didn't know is that he was merely a symptom of a much larger problem, because it would turn out that this image had escaped 4chan months ago in spite of efforts to suppress it. And as it jumped from Reddit to Tumblr to BuzzFeed, it was quickly reaching a wider, unsuspecting audience and becoming quite the skid mark on the reputation of furries online. And as if that weren't bad enough, we would all soon learn that a poop sandwich was not even the worst thing that someone had ordered at a Subway in real life. But hold on, I hear, through your fursuit, how could a drawing have this effect on people? It's the internet. You're gonna see things you don't like. And while this is absolutely true, following in the tradition of furries who ruin it for everyone else, this wasn't merely a matter of seeing a gross out furry image against your will. This was a widespread case of furry poop porn, and it was splattering the internet in a way nobody expected. But before we can fully dive into this furry poop incident, a quick timeline. June 8th, 2010. The original Spyro Subway image is posted to adult furry website E621 by an artist called Nitroxidal, an artist who would nuke his internet presence shortly thereafter. Attaining instant popularity in its category, it was reposted 6 months later to TBIB, the big image board, a massive Boru-style website that compiles tens of millions of tasteful Japanese images from smaller image boards. And as is the case with most Borus. The very next stop for their content is usually 4chan. June 2012. A 4chan user on the video games board drops this photoshopped Yu-Gi-Oh card containing a deceptively innocent picture of Spyro. Users recognized it immediately and begged him to reconsider. But this mad lad continued slowly, tortuously posting the rest of the image set, christening a new meme known as the Forbidden One. And in 2014, shit hit the fan. For reasons absolutely no one understands, a weirdly unwoke BuzzFeed article compiled the 50 worst things on the internet that year. And somewhere between a video of Boogie2988 making Mountain Dew Doritos slop and the girl who wore her boyfriend as a hat, BuzzFeed exposed tens of thousands of people to Spyro scat porn. But as luck would have it, the concept of a furry shock image was actually about to take off. Though you may be thinking, I know what a shock image is, and I don't remember this being relevant in the mid-2010s. So what could furries possibly have done to make it come back? I'm glad you asked. Let's address the stinky elephant in the room. The furry fandom has a long and documented history of extreme fetish behavior, bordering on life-threatening. Whether it's a reluctance to throw other furries under the bus or a refusal to acknowledge this whatsoever, furries and poop go together like furries and poop. And here's a brief list of their greatest shits. 2 babies, 1 fox. This reviled furry shock image, which blew up after it was posted to 4chan, depicts Tails from Sonic doing unspeakable things to 2 baby animals and then forcing them to eat their own waste. 2018. Furry influencer Bluefulf not only originates the infamous furry shits on a plate video, but was also exposed for running a Discord server called Smelly Furs, in which adult poop content was being exchanged in the presence of other minors. Also in 2018 was like a terrible year to be a furry. Messy Tails, the brown-nosed pup, became well known for so extensively documenting his obsession with playing in, wearing, and eating his own excrement that when he took a long and unannounced break from the internet, there was serious speculation that he had died via poop poison. He seems to be fine, but the definitive video on this topic has already been made, so please give it a watch. And in a similar but more lighthearted vein, the diaper fur sub-community is notorious for being very poorly behaved in real life. In 2015, they gained brief worldwide attention when a critical mass of diaper furs assembled at the Rainforest convention and systematically tore apart the venue with non-stop orgies, drug use, and the shoving of diapers into plumbing equipment that cost the hotel thousands of dollars in repairs. This is also not to mention anecdotal reports of a horrific smell coming from the convention. They were not invited back. And it goes without saying, the fetish art component of furry poop incidents is a small but thriving community, boasting about 14,000 drawings tagged scat on E621. And now that we can say for sure that Spyro Subway is fetish art, this begs the question, how does anyone figure out they're into this?
And poo-poo's out, and then they eat the poo-poo.
So what is this called? Coprophilia, also known as scatophilia, is a fetish in which people derive pleasure from waste. This is usually expressed as an interest in watching somebody else get pooped on or being the pooper. In the case of Spyro Subway, that explains the observer's point of view. Think about where your eye is drawn. The observer is likely someone who enjoys watching the sausage get made, so to speak. In much rarer cases, the fetish revolves around being the poop-e. In a rather infamous case, in 1989, a Japanese man was so captivated by caca that he climbed into the septic tank under a woman's toilet, got stuck, and died. And in the rarest form of this fetish, you get something called coprophagia. I'll let this man called the Poop Squatch explain what that is.
Hey YouTube, if you want to see me eat poop, I will do that for you on YouTube. But I need 10 million likes to this video and 1,000 subscribers. And
calling this extreme isn't merely a matter of opinion, as the DSM-4, the clinical handbook for diagnosing mental illness, actually mentions this fetish. In an acronym that I swear to God I did not make up for this video, coprophilia is classified under penis. paraphilia not otherwise specified, a clinical subgroup of extreme fetishes alongside those involving animals, dead bodies, enema addiction, and terrorizing people over the phone. Now obviously, most fetishes are formed by or before puberty, and are sometimes the result of traumatic events, which is to say, there are people who find themselves into this stuff through no fault of their own. Not that that makes it okay, but that being said, please do not eat poop. But if you absolutely must, Subway might have you covered. Part of the reason Spyro Subway triggered people the way that it did was because, to a small extent, there was a grain of truth. As mentioned before, Subway is among the fast food chains more known for their PR disasters than they've ever been for their food. In 1999, a 6-year-old became so ill after eating at Subway that he required a liver transplant. 2 Subways in the area were soon the target of a massive lawsuit after infecting 40 people with hepatitis A. In 2013, The Onion ran a fake article advertising a September 9/11 deal, where you could print out a coupon and present it to the store to get 2 footlongs for $9.11. And one store actually honored the transaction. By the time Subway corporate clapped back and figured out that this was a joke, it was a little too late. The next year, Subway came under food safety fire again when a food blogger went viral for her discovery that Subway, allegedly the healthier option compared to other fast food, was mixing a cancer-causing bleaching agent into their dough. Azodicarbonamide, best known for its use in making yoga mats more elastic, was actually alleged to be in the food products of dozens of other chains, but with Subway's luck, they ended up being the face of it. For what it's worth, they did remove the chemical from their bread. Now I have to disclaim, I've eaten at Subway a few times in my life. I thought it tasted perfectly fine, and 99% of the time, you have nothing to fear. But in arguably the most infamous Subway incident, Jared Fogle, a man who rose to international fame after attributing his enormous weight loss to the healthy options at Subway, was revealed to be a kid diddler. This was after he was the brand ambassador for 15 years and did speaking tours at schools. And finally, in the funniest thing that has ever happened at this restaurant, in 2021, a customer thought her tuna sub tasted so weird, she sent it to a lab for testing. The lab could not determine what the tuna was made of, reporting that not only was it not tuna, they weren't even sure if it was a fish. And with a rap sheet like that, is it really any surprise that Spyro Subway took place where it did? Which brings us back to the end of our timeline. In 2017, when it seemed that the Spyro Subway meme had finally been lost to time, CeeLo Green took a picture at the Grammys that was so funny that it reawakened an ancient meme from the dead. Like with Spyro, people began reposting the Forbidden One meme with pictures of CeeLo Green, Kim Jong-un, and inevitably, the shit sandwich. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, the Forbidden One meme originally comes from Yu-Gi-Oh! If you assemble 5 cards of a specific type, Exodia, the Forbidden One, is formed and you automatically win the match. Which, psychologically, is exactly what happened to everyone who didn't know they were looking at Spyro Subway until it was too late. And one of the most interesting features about Spyro Subway is that, like clockwork, it pops off every 5 years. Its introduction of 4chan in 2012, CeeLo Green and this guy who used it as a YouTube thumbnail in 2017, and its inclusion in a large gaming stream in 2022. So if the math checks out, in 2027, this thing is gonna blow up. And this leaves only 2 questions unanswered. Who would make this, and why did he disappear? Nitroxidal, a furry artist active from 2008, is the creator of Spyro Subway. It's not clear when he went AWOL, but several years after the Spyro Subway image was already circulating, his Fur Affinity account had been wiped. And as for why make this, some fetishes are just crazier than others. When all else fails, E621 will always host the scariest gooner art you've ever seen in your life. And I use the word art intentionally because there is artistic merit. As the wiki for streamer Jabroni Mike describes while explaining the meme's inclusion in one of his streams. The meme started during one of Jabroni Mike's streams of the Spyro Reignited trilogy, in which the topic of a particular Spyro image was discussed. The image in question depicted a scene in which Hunter the cheetah expels feces onto a Subway sandwich, while Spyro apathetically furnishes the fecal sandwich. Sergeant Boyd is seen in the background, watching anxiously with sweat dripping. Jabroni Mike immediately caught on to the cultural critique that the artwork was conveying, and praised it for its unapologetic criticism of Subway's sandwich quality. He immediately caught on to how the feces in the sandwich were meant to convey how the sandwich tastes in real life. He recognized how the portrayal of beloved video game characters like Spyro and Hunter as washed-up sandwich artists discusses the nature of intellectual property under capitalism, and how inevitably they will always find themselves hoard out on a billboard advertising some entirely irrelevant schlock. Finally, Mike believed that the decision to include Sergeant Boyd was a stroke of genius. By including him as a nervous coworker, sweating as he wonders if expelling feces onto a sandwich is legal, he takes the role of the consumer, staring in fear as their favorite IP gets destroyed by capitalism. That is a very robust analysis, like, deadass. And that's kind of everything we know. The only remaining evidence of the artist's existence is some Ben 10 fetish art, and he's otherwise completely abandoned the nitroxidal persona. And as is the case with most artists who show up, shit all over everything, and then leave, he most likely just didn't want the association nor the blowback. And can you really blame him for trying to make the best of a shitty situation? This has been Bad Art History. The cursed Sonic Shadow toilet art with no known origin. For the last 10 years, this mysterious illustration has been endlessly reposted on Twitter and Reddit, a staple of the bad Sonic fan art genre. Few could resist the appeal of the anthropomorphic Sonic toilet. But the more you investigate this image, the weirder it gets. Endless dead links, a bizarre image board whose existence has been wiped from the surface web, and one of the longest, strangest, most unexplainable games of telephone on the internet. Who drew this? Where did they go? And why are they so determined never to be found? This is the never-ending rabbit hole of the Skibidi Sonic toilet. Today's art history mystery, fur affinity, fluids, and how to fall off the face of the earth. In case you've never seen it, this is a rather infamous piece of Sonic fan art, featuring Sonic and Shadow the Hedgehog merged into a single, fleshy, toilet entity. Shadow can be seen voicing his disapproval of the situation, and just out of frame looms the fat gut of a character coming to use the bathroom. And remember the gut, because it is very important. So, for obvious reasons, this image persisted in people's memory, and right off the bat, there's a weird inconsistency. Because since this image's earliest known origin of Halloween of 2013, the version that's been posted and reposted ad nauseum is actually cropped. The left section of the image is often cut out entirely, and when you plug it into reverse image search, something weird happens. The earliest result goes nowhere. Fools.us is a defunct site with broken formatting. No matter, old forums die off and fail to archive all the time. But you start pulling the thread and you realize there are tons of dead links. And strangely enough, this image did not originate from DeviantArt, Fur Affinity, or even E621. And if you don't know what that is, we'll get there. But there's another lead. iChan.org. Several links come back to iChan, but once you start looking them up, it's another dead end. There is zero trace of iChan anywhere online other than this dead Twitter account and this little mushroom icon. But we can use context clues. Chan boards are infamously filled with adult content, and their insular nature makes them difficult to find. Based on the content of the image, we can make an educated guess about the kind of board it appeared on, and we can safely assume that it's legit fetish art, which does narrow things down. But finally, a break in the case. A reverse image result from November 29th, 2013 leads to cheeseburger.com, which leads to something awful. 2014. The earliest available version of this image is from a thread by user Andrew Garbage Day Miller listing the strangest fan art around. The early 2010s were very much the beginning of the larger cringe movement that would come to define the latter half of the decade, at least online. And there was truly something about the Sonic franchise that produced the strangest art you'd ever seen. The snowball effect truly began on February 13th of 2014, with this BuzzFeed listicle about bad Sonic art. Merely weeks later, it was reposted to College Humor, a massive website at the time. This image quickly became the poster child for terrible Sonic content. Between 2014 and 2017, this spread like wildfire. Anywhere you saw bad Sonic art, you saw this. This drawing was relentlessly posted to Reddit, to Twitter, to Imager, but never with an artist attribution. And one thing you need to understand about weird fetishy art like this is that the artist is often easy to find. So back to something awful. Right under the post, it says that it was created for the thread by one Friends Are Evil. So there we go. Mystery solved, right? This horrifying visage was created in 2013, it blew up in 2014, and sure enough, here was our guy. But something didn't feel quite right to me, so I reached out to Friends Are Evil, and lo and behold, he says this. I didn't actually do that Sonic Shadow toilet drawing. I think Something Awful's formatting is a little confusing, so it might have read as mine. I did do this original drawing for the fan art thread ages ago. I definitely saw the Shadow Sonic toilet image circulating the thread around the time I was frequenting the thread in 2011 to 2012. So, nothing is adding up. The image has no clear origin. It was never posted on any of the usual suspects. And upon reflection, at the very top of the Something Awful thread is an attribution to an artist simply named Call Now. And Call Now is an absolutely untraceable entity. There is no social media or art website profile matching this name. It's basically unsearchable. Okay, pseudonym. Happens all the time, especially for very objectionable adult artwork. From here, things start getting really strange. The BuzzFeed article was one of the last prominent examples of the full version of the image being circulated, because after that point, it was almost exclusively this version instead. And it may not seem like a big deal, but removing the fat belly from this image removes a massive piece of fetish context. And we have to talk about the fetish, but before we get there, there's something really important you need to know. Out there on the internet is a website that Coomers could only dream of developing. A website with an exhaustive catalog of every fetish that has ever existed. A website I hoped I would never have to consult. The Blue Furry site. So if you don't know, E621 is a staple of the furry adult art community. And while Sonic isn't strictly furry, the character designs are right on the cusp, and I had a good feeling that I was going to get a lead. So I made an account and plugged in the following search terms: Sonic, toilet, and transformation. And once you disable the pee-pee poo-poo filters, there it is, attributed to one Fizz the Ancient. So this time it had to be the artist, right? Because this website is meticulous about tagging and cataloging. But one look at the artist's gallery, censored for your peace of mind, and it's immediately obvious that this is not their work. In fact, it only has their name on it because of a mix-up with an old Tumblr post. So artist misattribution once, a mistake. Twice, whoever made this did not want to be found. Because even on the Blue Furry site, this drawing got a tremendous amount of downvotes. And you might be thinking, surely the people who frequent the site have seen it all. What is so bad about this one in particular?
What the hell? Oh my God, no way.
So let's quickly address the Anthro Hedgehog in the room. Why is Sonic fan art so weird? I'm gonna be so real, I don't know. But I have a game theory. Sonic is a very child-oriented franchise that people tend to cling on to in their adulthood as a source of comfort. It also tends to be the cringier fanbase due to its origins in 90s ratitude and failure to adapt to modern sensibilities. And historically, it's produced a lot of edgy OCs. And there's also a famous mismatch between the seriousness with which it handles its subject matter versus the execution. Now, the furry community is similarly deeply misunderstood and often a refuge for online artists, incredibly welcoming to people with marginal interests as well as fringe fetishes and adult content. So the Venn diagram of people interested in Sonic, digital art, and furry culture converges in a huge way. And as a result, you get tons of fan art that leans into increasingly niche interests. And as you approach the extremes, you get some really, really, really freaky art. And speaking of freaky, let's define exactly what fetishes we're discussing here. On the surface, this may just look like hee-hee funny Sonic, but I promise you, this type of fan art hits a lot of fetish cross-sections. Furry, feet, diapers, poo-poo, and transformation. And while most of these are self-explanatory, there is one that requires a closer look. Transformation, agalmatophilia, or TF, is relatively common within the furry community, and that's not shocking given the transcendent nature of wanting to inhabit a non-human body. Its earliest furry web presence can be traced back to the 1997 site Transfer. And the closest to a formal definition I could find is from this incredible 2012 article by, I shit you not, professional British gaming researcher Dr. Mark Griffiths. He describes it as a form of sexual fetishism in which an individual derives sexual arousal from descriptions about and depictions of transformations, usually of people being transformed into other beings or objects. He continues, I also read that the transformations are typically non-consensual, with the transformer often becoming confused, scared, or angry as the changes take place. And knowing all of that, this image suddenly becomes much easier to explain. But we still haven't answered the question of who the hell made this. And by this point, I was losing hope. 2 artist dead ends. Every version of the image led back to some other version in an endless game of telephone. And frankly, I was freaking out because at the time that I found artist number 1, I was sure that I had solved a decade-long mystery, and I even tweeted about it. And now, I had nothing to back it up. And the story could end right there. Were it not for the fact that there was one more famous piece of Sonic toilet transformation art in the exact same style. And this one, I was determined to find. So back to square one. DeviantArt was a complete bust. A potential link to Wizard-chan's depression board turned up nothing. And checking the file names of individual images was useless because many of them were named 2ce.png. The file name from the image on the Know Your Meme page. We were going in circles. So with determination in my heart, I returned to the Blue Furry site and typed in the following: Sonic, toilet, transformation, pee-pee. And sure enough, there was one image strikingly similar to the Sonic toilet. Sonic Urinal Heroes. We were so back. And to make a serious comparison here, both images are arranged the same way. On the left, an anonymous character with a large gut, which is why I brought it up before, looms over the transformation victims on the right. Both are set in a bathroom. Both use a relatively muted color palette. The line weight, the thin white highlights, the subject matter, the composition, the looks of distress. Even the way Shadow and Knuckles' eyes are rendered is remarkably similar. And if that wasn't enough, this image was posted on May 31st of 2013, mere months before the first archive sighting of the Shadow toilet. So who is our culprit? While I cannot claim beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is our guy, this break in the case was illustrated by a furry fetish artist going by the name Clannad. Their galleries on Fur Affinity and Ink Bunny contain dozens and dozens of images of the Sonic crew in adult situations, including toilet transformation. For obvious reasons, I cannot show most of these on screen, and while it's important to credit an artist with their work, please be aware that these images are incredibly graphic and probably not worth having in your search history. So if you do seek them out, please be warned. Can we definitively say this is the artist? No. But the pieces all fit, and together, it's a hell of a coincidence. Now, as for the present day, this image still gets reposted from time to time, notably the version without the gut, but it's far past its heyday. Sonic art continues to be as weird and marginal as ever, and those who seek images like this out are surely to find more. While it cannot be said with certainty that Clannad is the originator of this long-running Sonic meme, they have certainly done their part to contribute to the culture. And as for whoever may truly be responsible, their sheer dedication to never being tracked down is really admirable. So has this internet art mystery been solved? I think it's as solved as it's ever gonna get. And if I wasn't unemployable before this video, my prospects now are circling the drain. This has been an art history mystery. Quick note on this video, because I don't know if this is something that anybody would notice, but it jumped out at me and I thought it was so funny. I spoke Russian before I spoke English, so I did not actually speak English like in any kind of degree of fluency until I was like 7, really. So, I learned how to say everything the way that I said it at home, and then I also learned how to say everything the way my ESL teacher taught me to, which was like the standard accepted American pronunciation, right? But I grew up in Staten Island, and I also spent a lot of time in Brooklyn, so I was surrounded by people who didn't actually speak the standard way. So as a result, I learned like 2 to 3 versions of every single word just in case, and I always like choose the wrong one. And it was so funny because I was watching this video back and I was like, oh my god, I'm totally using my ESL accent right now. Because I sound different in this one than the other ones. The word that jumps out at me is like the word post. As in like posting something online. I was going like post, you know, like P-O-A-S-T. Because that's like the right way to say it, right? But that's not the way I want to say it. Justin RPG, an artist who spent the last 16 years terrorizing the internet with his Pokemon poop artwork. A man with a hamburger stapled to his bedroom wall. A cautionary tale of Asperger's, obsession, and unchecked internet access. What really makes him special is the unbelievable amount of art that he's made around his fantasy, unintentionally making him one of the most accomplished outsider artists on the internet today. But why does his name strike fear into the heart of forum users everywhere? Why does he make this stuff? And why has nobody been able to stop him? These are the life and times of the Pokemon poop Picasso. It all went down sometime around 2008. Justin RPG, known also as Moltres first appeared on the scene on the adult forum website Ekka's Portal. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But since his initial appearance, Justin has generated hundreds of mixed media artworks featuring himself in perilous situations where he is forced to consume the bodily waste of legendary Pokemon and his beloved wife, Reshiram, among many other things. But what truly brought him recognition was his absolutely absurd art style. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Because lacking any formal training, Justin managed to achieve cult status by spamming his artwork absolutely everywhere and inundating any forum that would possibly have him with endless questions about what it might be like to be eaten by dragons. And while this may seem like bad art to an outsider, Justin RPG actually developed a very sophisticated design vocabulary. All of his pieces use photos of himself, PNGs of Pokemon or other characters that he likes, and background imagery seemingly selected at random, all compiled in a collage. It's actually very formulaic. And at a glance, it might seem random, but he has a prolific body of work, and it becomes pretty easy to tell a Justin RPG original. And we know that because of his 2-decade-long terror campaign on every forum and Facebook group he's ever been in.
What the hell? Oh my god, no.
So about that forum, Ekka's Portal is a gathering place for vorophiles, or people who deeply enjoy the idea of consuming or being consumed by a person or creature. This is among the more common types of adult artwork that you might find on a place like DeviantArt, and one that appeals very strongly to our main protagonist. But the thing about Justin is that his fetishes are seemingly endless. The list includes vor, being shrunken, being unborn, which is exactly what it sounds like, and a thing that I literally can't say on YouTube, so I'm just going to play you this clip.
Even poo-poo comes out. They have poo-poo's out, and then they eat the poo-poo.
From 2008 to 2012, Justin was a menace. He would go on all sorts of Pokemon Facebook groups and derail people's role-playing in the comments by randomly bringing up his fetish. He would open so many threads on family-friendly Pokemon forums talking about eating their shit that mods had to step in to personally remove his ability to do so. He wrote so many meandering, endlessly long captions about living inside Reshiram's stomach that he was able to recycle one for an assignment in his English class, and then posted it to the internet. So what's actually going on here? Before we get into the deep art lore, you need to understand that Justin suffers a diminished capacity to understand what is socially appropriate, and kind of like Chris Chan, he doesn't understand not to feed the trolls. Now obviously many people on the spectrum are perfectly functional and nothing like this guy, but due to the nature of his disability, this is largely going to be a discussion of him as an artist and not as a person. 2012, the beginning of widespread exposure for Justin's artwork. Just the previous year, in addition to his Microsoft Paint collection, he had also taken an interest in making music. But 2011 came and went, and his 4 self-published albums lived in relative obscurity until YouTuber Cool as Hell Robot reposted his song Stuck in Lugia's Stomach Alone. And this may be really hard to believe, but this is a parody of Stuck in the Middle with You.
I have an idea. Lugia eat me. So I'm stuck in Lugia's stomach alone. Yes, I'm stuck in Lugia's stomach alone. I'm seeing what it's like to be in a stomach.
It's fascinating stuff, and this set into motion a terrible chain of events. Justin received a wave of exposure that would be the first of many, and ultimately end up in a death hoax. 2013, he now had a relatively active Kiwi Farms thread and an Encyclopedia Dramatica page competing for who could humiliate him the most. But he was undeterred. He continued to endlessly spam questions on forums and on Reddit, which were negatively received due to their irrelevant and bizarre nature. He would continue creating literature as well, ranging from such pieces as The Great Moltres Rider to the much more forthcoming Kayla Eat Poop. And you might be wondering, if he has a disability this profound, Where are his parents? Whether his mother simply did not know or did not care, Justin found himself in a position of unlimited internet access, which only fueled his obsession. 2016, he had by now amassed a cult of personality of horrified, intrigued onlookers. His Facebook page filled and filled with artwork on the daily, and his specialty, long meandering captions that described in excruciating detail the situation he was in. Here are one of the few safe for work samples that I still had to edit. My wife Reshiram's swallowing me. Reshiram feels all warm inside and feels love because she is swallowing her husband. She likes the idea of swallowing the one she loves and is enjoying every second of it. She knows I will go to her stomach and face digestion, but it pleases her to swallow her lover. She enjoys swallowing me. That is her favorite part of Vor, swallowing her husband. She identifies as a pred. By this point, you might be thinking to yourself, this is pretty standard internet weirdo stuff. Yeah, it's a guy with a weird fetish and he makes art about it. What makes this artwork? You would be shocked at how deep that rabbit hole actually goes. If you don't know, outsider art is a term that originated in 1940s France meant to describe art made by people in psychiatric institutions, by children, or by people who had limited to no contact with civilization. And what those categories have in common is that they are very obviously artwork, but created by someone who doesn't have the capacity to know what that means. This isn't to call Justin stupid or unskilled, but to demonstrate that he is a true outsider artist, someone with no training who nevertheless produced a huge, consistent body of work. In his case, he's a multimedia artist who dabbles in digital art, music, and literature, and while it's hard to draw the line at where a hobby ends and artistic pursuit begins, the mind-blowing amount of work that he's made might make him one of the most prolific outsider artists on the internet right now. And what's crazier still is that I suspect that he doesn't view any of this as art at all. To him, it's just this raw expression of this thing that he really likes. But he's infamous for a good reason, and the deeper problem with his fantasies is that he's recently expressed a desire to make them happen in real life. And the beginning of his truly degenerate arc would be a death hoax. October 6th, 2017. Twitter user Amontet, in a now deleted tweet, announced that Justin RPG is in fact alive and well. While the events preceding this are completely lost to time, users in their replies seemed split as to whether they thought this was a good thing, because by 2017 his output had slowed considerably, leading some to speculate that he had died and many others to forget about him entirely. But he would continue to post art, haunting whatever forums had not already banned him. While people were just content to point and laugh, in 2021 he made a Reddit post asking about the legality of doing something with a Bengal tiger. Now, granted, the chance of him encountering a Bengal tiger in real life and it not mauling him immediately are slim to none. But this was a notable departure from the purely fantasy element of his previous posts. And he is really, really active on Reddit these days. In 2023, he made a post inquiring as to why bird waste has a very particular flavor. And also that year, on a much more serious note, he openly referred to himself as the Z word. And the problem with horror cows like this is that when they don't receive real-life intervention, they fail to make a distinction between the reality of their situation and what they're posting online. And they can be a huge danger to themselves, to others, to animals. It's all fun and games until something happens.
A YouTube personality called Chris Chan has just been arrested in Virginia on, of all things, incest charges.
And that brings us to today, because there hasn't been much activity on the Justin RPG front. So what is this artist up to these days? Justin, like many traditional lolcows, documents his every waking thought and desire. And as for the artwork, he's still making it, and it hasn't changed one bit. Forum culture is largely dead these days, and I can't imagine that there are many remaining from which he hasn't already been banned. But where there's a will, there's a way. And Justin RPG continues to obliviously blaze new ground in the world of outsider art. Love him or hate him, his body of work, much like his Pokemon wife, is legendary. This has been an art history lesson.
It's so hard to keep the smile from my face. Losing control, Pokemon being eaten. I'm in a stomach to see what it's like. Here I am, stuck in Lugia's stomach alone. Well, it ain't right to eat a Pokemon, so I let the...
Little editor's note here. Justin RPG is not a furry, but this story, he's my, first of all, Justin RPG is my literal favorite guy on the internet. I am fascinated by him. And also, even though he's not a furry, there's so much overlap with the kind of art that he makes and like the extremes of furry fetishism in general that I just thought it would be like a shame not to include him. The South Korean furry heart surgeon who spent over $100 grand on Star Fox giant furry porn. Or so goes the legend. A furry philanthropist so committed to his fetish that he single-handedly financed the creation of an entire adult genre. So how does nobody know who this guy is? Since 2010, one mysterious furry has devoted himself to commissioning thousands of images of giant Star Fox characters getting it on with buildings, entire planets, and each other. A furry whose contribution to the community lined the pockets of hundreds of artists, yet whose paper trail is non-existent. So how did he run in to this much money? Is it actually possible to pork an entire planet? And how deep does this furry hole actually go? This is a case of fur, fluids, and financial literacy. This is the legendary true story of Togepi 1125. So if you've never seen this before, Star Fox Macro Furry Art refers to this growing collection of over 3,000 lovingly rendered images of characters from the Star Fox and Pokemon game series engaging in violent, passionate, planet-destroying love acts. You may notice the wide variety of art styles, the skyscrapers used for scale, and the fighter jets firing in vain at the 60,000-foot-tall lovers as they obliterate Corneria City. But if you think this is just some extreme example of furry behavior, you'd be wrong. Because the mainstream roots of this fetish as we understand it today actually got their start in the 1950s indie sci-fi scene. So what can Super Smash Bros. Melee, exorbitant spending, and giant angry broads possibly have in common? And how did it result in all of this? The answer is a lot more sophisticated than you may think. But before we can dive into any of that, a quick timeline. 2007, South Korea. Still ringing in the new year, on January 4th, Fur Affinity user Togepi1125 uploads this adult fanfiction, featuring Fox and Falco from the beloved 1993 SNES game being really good friends in the shower. And immediately, fellow users voiced their admiration of Togepi's work, encouraging him to make more. But little did they know how much more they were about to get. Inspired by the positive reception, Togepi got to work, uploading several suggestive photos of Star Fox plushies and, bizarrely, this one of Diddy Kong. But faced with his own artistic limitations, Togepi realized that the only thing standing between him and a universe of custom Star Fox hentai was his wallet. Though it's not clear if these were gifts or commissions, by March of 2007, Togepi was posting art created by friends and fans every single week. And the more he posted, the more of a niche fan base he acquired. By 2009, he was increasingly becoming known to the furry community not for his artwork, but for his extremely specific fetish. Fox and Falco getting it on as they grow to the size of buildings. By 2010, Togepi was becoming kind of a household name, and he was literally keeping the lights on for a lot of these artists. Though we'll touch on this later, please keep in mind that furry commissions can get very expensive very fast. But for Togepi, money was simply no object. And in May 2010, we hit the point of no return. If I'm gonna spend $1,000 to $2,000 a month on Star Fox porn, I may as well shoot for the moon, he thought. And from here on out, the fetish got more and more particular. Feet, Speedos, catastrophic weather events, and Fox always on the bottom. And in case any viewers were concerned about the hypothetical safety of those in Fox and Falco's way, not to worry, because Togepi was hard at work creating extensive fetish lore for the art. 42 rules, in fact. But notable among them were collecting robots, the ability to breathe underwater, and weekly planned evacuations of the planets that got turned into flashlights. There's a lot to discuss, but with crazy spending came crazier rumors. Furries and 4chan users alike speculated wildly on just how Togepi was able to afford this many commissions. He worked in surgery. He must have been a heart or a brain surgeon. That's why he must be so guarded about his identity. right? But the years came and went and few explanations actually surfaced. And by 2016, Togepi had not only generated 99% of all Macro Falco artwork, but also revealed that he had spent $60,000 on it since it all began, only adding to the urban legend about secret mega-rich furries who will drop crazy money to get off. But the crazy money thing, at a bird's eye view, can be explained. He might have a high-paying job, and so can the fascination with Star Fox. Furries exist, but how do you account for the giant thing and the ever-growing community, pardon the pun, of macro furs? For once, I don't really know. So let's bring in our resident fetish expert. Hi, I'm somebody else. Anyway, before we can debunk any rumors, let's understand exactly what fetish we're dealing with here. Macrophilia, which directly translates to lover of large, is a sexual fascination with giants, typically giant women or objects. But as with many adult interests, there's a ton of variation. And when it comes to furries, it's very much its own thing. Macrofurs, as the name suggests, is macrophilia with a coat of hair. Or as Wikifur puts it, a fur-speak term used to describe any furry character who is much larger than a normal-sized being. Some macrofurs fantasize about being the giant, others fantasize about surrendering to the giant's overwhelming might, sometimes called microphiles, and others still just get off to the aesthetic. And if your gut's telling you that this is largely an internet thing, you'd be right. Modern furry culture has kind of always existed in the form of fanzines and art, but its true heyday came in the 90s with the advent of news groups and IRC chat rooms. And as for macrofur specifically, in 1997, macrophile.com changed everything, inspiring dozens of similar websites like Giantess Boru, Giantess World, and notably, Temden's Macro Furry and Animal in Media page, an exhaustive catalog of every time an animal character anywhere became giant. Though this website wasn't outwardly explicit, it marked a sexual awakening for thousands of macrofurs. Even today, macrofur artwork is ubiquitous on everything from DeviantArt to trash to Twitter. And we can do the internet history bit all day, but I'd much rather get to the burning question of what is the appeal. To quote one online macrophile, "I remember seeing a rerun of Attack of the 50-Foot Woman when I was around 13 years old. Seeing her tear the roof off the building to get at her husband overwhelmed my young brain at the time. Shortly after that, another movie called Village of the Giants did the same thing. I can remember one of the giantesses in the movie said something like, 'Oh, why don't I just step on him?' Which again turned my underage mind on like nothing prior. I would be uncontrollably drawn to the giantess's beauty and power despite the danger such an encounter would bring, whether it be as food to nourish her superior body or as a sexual play toy to be used and broken after. I would have no other choice other than submit myself to her. To have my life be hers to do with as she pleased would become the sole purpose for my existence. The exhilaration, danger, fear, and sexual excitement would outweigh my very instinct for survival. So to boil it down, power, helplessness, and a controlled sense of fear, otherwise known as the core components of many of these types of fetishes. But there's a very human element too, one that you may find somewhat relatable. As adult creator Giantess Caitlin puts it, "The first time I had a good tingly feeling was when I was watching Tom have so much fun trying to catch Jerry. Little did I know it was the start of my sexuality. By the time I got to high school, I was fantasizing about literally crushing my high school crushes, swallowing my boyfriends and girlfriends alive, and putting my entire foot through the school. Most of the time, I felt out of place and very alone sexually." And in a way, it makes sense. The desire to experience fear and helplessness at the hands of a being that could kill you, but instead takes a liking to you and chooses to let you live, can be an incredibly comforting and arousing scenario to a certain type of person. But as far as Togepi 1125 is concerned, 60 grand and counting is a heart-stopping amount of money. But luckily for us, Togepi is the top heart surgeon in all of South Korea. That is, according to everyone that isn't him. Illuminating commentary from Dollar Store Shoe on Head. So to cut right to the chase here, Togepi is not a heart surgeon or a neurosurgeon or anything of the sort. In fact, he's debunked this more than once to deaf ears. In a 2021 interview, he explains that while he does work in the medical field, he makes a normal salary and saves money by living at home and spending his pocket change on commissions. He pretty candidly states that he doesn't have much money left over, which leaves only one huge question unanswered. How did he figure out that he was into this? It all goes back, as most things do, to Super Smash Bros. Melee for the Nintendo GameCube. 2001, Melee, an ensemble fighting game featuring an array of Nintendo characters, blows up. It was the first GameCube title to sell 1 million copies, and it would rock 14-year-old Togepi's world forever. One day, while playing the game, he learned of an action replay code called Mushroom Stacker Code, a way to cheat the game by making your character grow infinitely. Though he had a fondness for giants, heroes, and giant hero characters since his early childhood, something about this action replay code awakened him. He describes meticulously testing it out on every character until he landed on Fox and Falco, and from there began his affinity for the Star Fox series. The more he played, the closer he grew to the characters, discovering aspects of his sexuality along the way. He cites the scene in Alice in Wonderland where Alice grows to the size of a house as being particularly fascinating for his young self. But the first time he truly realized he was into macro, in his own words, "The very first moment that I found macro sexually arousing was when I played Mario Party 3. There was a mini-game named Toadstool Titan that the players became giant with the mushroom and beat other players. Giant Yoshi aroused me in an unusual way." But that's not all. You may recall that Togepi laid out a set of 42 fetish rules for his universe. And that's because he feels particularly connected to the character. He describes his version of Falco as an ideal being who is worshipped by non-giants, a cocky and brash personality that he admits is a departure from the games. And he's hardly the first person to project his desires onto a giant being, because we've been doing this since at least 1726. Allow me to regale you with a micro-history lesson on macrophilia. Gulliver's Travels, a satirical story based on exaggerated travelers' tales from the 1700s, is known among some macrophiles for one scene in particular. The protagonist, Gulliver, sails to the island of Lilliput, only to be attacked by an army of tiny Lilliputians and restrained to the ground. Or for a more iconic example, one needs only look at Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, a 1958 indie sci-fi flick about a wealthy heiress who becomes a giant after an encounter with an alien. After being gaslit, restrained, and finding out about her husband's infidelity, she goes on a scantily clad rampage, destroying everything in her path. Now, are either of these actually works of fetish fiction? Maybe the second one, but I sincerely doubt it. But their impact is undeniable. Like Mario Party 3 for Togepi, these works of fiction, among many similar, represented a fetish awakening for many, many macrophiles. The ingredients are all there if you think about it. Bondage, power dynamics, surrendering yourself to an overwhelming force. Sometimes it really does just take two neurons firing in precisely the right way to get hooked for life. But that's ancient history, which brings us neatly along to the present day. As of filming, Togepi's Fur Affinity page contains 3,438 submissions and counting, though I should point out that a lot of these are just slight variations on each other. A lot of work nonetheless. But this all comes out to real money, and in 2019, Togepi claimed that his commissions had thus far ran him 96 grand, which, if my math is correct, comes out to $156,000 as of this year. That's $156,000 put back into the furry economy. And to call this guy a folk hero among furries would be seriously underselling it. Even now, his Twitter replies are filled with furries and non-furries alike thanking him for lining the pockets of hundreds of real people. So enormous was this man's need to coom that an untold number of artists probably paid their rent, bought their groceries, and filled up their car with his commission money. Is his fetish a little bit strange and impenetrable for those outside the furry community? Perhaps, but his contributions improved many lives, and if his extremely active Twitter and Fur Affinity are anything to go by, he has no plan on stopping anytime soon. And truly, he seems incredibly modest about the whole thing. He concludes his 2021 interview by saying, "There are many small fetishes in the furry fandom, and art commissions are one of the best ways to satisfy such needs and to find friends having a common interest. I want every fetish to be respected." And in the biggest irony of all, for a man so obsessed with big giants and heroes, he became one of the biggest heroes the furry community had ever seen. And though there may come a day where another furry inevitably outspends him, that's a pretty tall order. This ends tonight's coverage of bad art history. The time a Chicago labor union posted fat furry porn to its official Facebook page, igniting a Nazi Communist Furry War. In January of 2020, this Facebook page inexplicably posted furry fan art in support of workers' rights. But this was no ordinary colorful fan art, because this was furry porn. And in no time at all, this post would go absolutely viral, forcing the labor union to answer a very uncomfortable question. Did they know? The answer is gonna floor you. But before we can get there, because of the huge overlap of communists and furries within this community, this was not your ordinary furry porn. This was made for a higher cause. Because this furry porn was made to fight the Nazis. Today's art history lesson, fat furry fetish art and the battle against fascism. On January 27, 2020, the Greater Chicago Industrial Workers of the World Facebook page posted this furry art with the caption, "The best cure for a case of the Mondays is one big union." It depicts a morbidly obese skunk with the IWW logo crushing a stereotypically rich fox-type creature underneath its massive fupa. While it may not be obvious to you, this is furry porn, and it's called fat fur to be specific. According to Wikifur, fat fur is a subcategory of feederism fetish art, which focuses on weight gain and helplessness and just generally being fat. Not to be confused with inflation, which is strictly about becoming huge, but not fat, due to being filled with air. Very important distinction. And you'd be forgiven for conflating the two, because these are some of the most popular genres of furry fetish art since the beginning of time. From DeviantArt to Fur Affinity to Twitter, this fetish subset is absolutely everywhere. And it's no surprise that in a political community disproportionately filled with furries, this would eventually breach containment. And that brings us to this post, because this fat fur fetish art was commissioned to clap back against the rise of alt-right furries within the community, and we'll get into exactly how that is. But first, a quick timeline. January 27th, the Facebook post. January 28th, Twitter user Space Drugs takes a screenshot and posts it with the question, "Is someone going to tell them?" Also January 28th, the Daily Dot publishes an article suggesting that the International Workers of the World official Facebook unknowingly posted furry art. And the IWW's response was absolutely goated. The IWW tweeted back, and I quote, "Unknowingly, winky face." This sent the furry community into an absolute tailspin. This was not oblivious boomer posting. This was malicious. Someone did this on purpose. Someone at the International Workers of the World knew what furries were, knew this was fetish art, knew people could tell, and hit send post. But who would possibly do this? We'll get there in a minute. Meanwhile, the community had erupted into furry on furry violence. On the one hand, you had people saying that this was funny, this was based, and it was good representation for their community. On the other, you had people complaining that this made it impossible for anyone to take furries seriously, and that it exposed a non-consenting audience to fetish art, which was a legitimate complaint, and also that it potentially reinforced the beliefs of Nazi furs. But let's be real for a second. How serious was the Nazi furry problem? It actually was. Furries are a massively diverse group of people with dissenting opinions in politics, and where you have a hyper-accepting group, you often get snakes in the grass. Nazi furries do exist as an extreme minority, but some of the best-known furry convention scandals of the last 10 years have been tied back to Nazi furry trolling. However, one thing almost any furry can agree on is their love of furry art, so what better way to clap back at the furry Nazi chuds than in a language they understand? Remember, you can start out irony poisoned, but sooner or later that cognitive dissonance will kick in, and you'll find yourself Sieg Heiling in a hot, sweaty fursuit outside a DMV. So the furry community had cause for concern. This was potentially a PR nightmare. Normal people simply did not understand this stuff, and the International Workers of the World Twitter was no small account. It was followed by Bernie Sanders. And dozens of furries in the replies voiced their dissent, understandably worried about how the workers' rights community would look at this. But it was about to get much worse, or better, depending on your side of the aisle, because the IWW doubled down. January 29th, 2 days after the original post, the fighting was at a fever pitch, and a smaller account affiliated with the IWW made things even worse by tweeting the following. If you run a business or make a living from commissions making fursuits, you have a place in Textile and Leather Workers Industrial Union 410. And in case anyone was still unsure of the position on the furry question overall, the original Facebook poster who started it all had this to say. We believe that when workers come together as a unit, they can overpower their bosses. We originally took the meaning of the image to be in reference to this principle. While we have no official affiliation with the furry community, we appreciate that furry workers hold the same values of worker power, and welcome them in our union the same as any other worker. So did they know? Yes. Did they care? Absolutely not. Does this art actually fight Nazis for real? The answer is genuinely really interesting, because there's a huge missing component of the story that we're not talking about. Who actually drew this? And how does it relate to bashing the fash? A tragically overlooked part of the story is that the original artist was never given any credit, because no one has been able to track them down. But I think I have a pretty good lead. If you look closely, this illustration was signed Eileen 2019, and after searching through Fur Affinity and Twitter, I found an account belonging to one Eileen Samoyed. While I'm not 100% certain this is her, and I haven't been able to contact to ask, the art style and subject matter are freakishly similar, like down to even the exact same fetish. Though I haven't been able to find this particular commission anywhere in this artist's works. And I want to state for the record that if this isn't the actual artist, if this is the kind of art you enjoy, please show her your support. Now, as for the Nazi thing, quick history lesson. In Weimar, Germany, right before World War II, there was an explosion in the subversive art scene, and as Nazis rose to power, they made an effort to distinguish between good culture and degeneracy. And you may notice this rhetoric if you're ever on alt-right Twitter. Tons of what we might understand as modern art was destroyed in degenerate art purges. It was burned, it was torn apart, and the artists were typically persecuted. So how does this relate to fat furry fetish art? Well, whether it was the artist's intention or not, the choice to create a very uncomfortable viewing experience for an average person, combined with featuring a body type often considered unattractive, follows the subversive tradition of bucking against the wider culture. So in a really roundabout way, this artist did kind of stick it to the Nazis of old. But back to the present day. This shitpost doesn't seem to have affected the international workers of the world or any of their social media in any lasting way. While the offending tweet was since deleted, which was probably the right move, its impact can still be felt in the tons of tweets and Tumblr threads that it left behind documenting this explosive phenomenon. And as for the person who commissioned the art, we know who that is. Kinda. The Daily Dot article profiles the anonymous user Jay using a pseudonym, and he explains his thought process. I see far-right furries involving politics and laugh my ass off, so I thought it'd be funny to do it for politics me and my friends actually like. Most of the fandom leans fairly left-wing, and I felt like people might get a laugh out of it. I didn't really expect the image to spread as far as it did. But as quickly as fat fur fetishists are willing to spread their legs and their wallets, so too did this image spread across Twitter for several unforgettable days. And while this would quickly be overshadowed by the other big news event of early 2020, it was memorable nonetheless. And at the end of it all, to quote Jay, it was just really funny. This has been an art history lesson. Since the dawn of time, men have been getting their Johnsons stuck in planes, trains, and automobiles. Because while known to very few, these freaky fellas actually belong to a notorious furry subgroup of airplane lovers. The men and women who goon to airplanes with boobs. But why? What was too weird even for other furries? How did that guy from Washington State have enough time to fuck 1,000 tailpipes? And most pressingly, why don't we understand anything about this fetish? Today's case involves a Puerto Rican furry, an airline pilot, and the little engine that could. This is the wild story of airplane gooners. Today's freaky file: Borus, Boeings, and the men that bone them. So if you've never heard of this before, anthroplanes, better known as aeromorphs, are adult depictions of aircraft with jiggly human qualities. Usually busty female airplanes with exaggerated features and of enormous size. The cockpit becomes the head, the wings become the arms, and the cargo hold becomes the cargo hold. And amazingly, almost all of the aeromorph artwork out there was actually influenced by one furry, who we will come back to. But you may be asking yourself, this is just some DeviantArt stuff. No one's actually fondled a fighter jet or banged a Black Hawk. Luckily for us, one of the only reasons we even know these people exist is because they seemingly can't keep their hands inside the vehicle at all times. It's time to talk about car fuckers. 2023, Germany. It would turn out that there is one more level above the Mile High Club, and its sole occupant is 24-year-old Sarah Rodo. After having a profound experience on a Boeing 737, Sarah realized that planes could do for her what no man ever could. She's since devoted enormous amounts of money and time to collecting airplane models, getting airplane tattoos, and going on no fewer than 30 vacations for the sole purpose of riding the plane. To her, the planes are all a single collective being that she's nicknamed Dickie, so flying on one doesn't mean she's cheating on another. And while some of the comments on her interview are somewhat unsympathetic, they miss a pretty important point. Sarah is what's known as an objectum sexual. That is, someone who experiences an exclusive attraction to an inanimate object. She just happened to land on airplanes before anything else. But this hardly stops with planes. 1973. A forensic biologist stumbles upon what is arguably one of the first documented cases of car-related goonicide. Beginning that year, Dr. J.C. Rupp chronicled several highly unusual deaths involving nude, middle-aged men and their cars. But unlike what you may be thinking, these guys did not mean to harm themselves. It quickly became apparent that while they perished due to strangulation by being dragged by the neck behind their cars, these men were choking the chicken literally, by rigging their cars to do this for their own pleasure. You can probably imagine how this might go wrong. In a bizarre coincidence, a 40-year-old airline pilot was actually one of the few recorded cases of erotic car-related goon death, and he was far from the last, because by the mid-2000s, dozens of accounts of man-on-exhaust pipe action had made their way into the public consciousness, and no vehicle was safe. 2007. A British man is convicted of sexual breach of the peace after 2 hotel workers break into his room, not cool by the way, and find him riding his motorcycle in the most literal sense. 2015. A LiveLeak user uploads CCTV footage of a Thai man readjusting the hood ornament of a Porsche over and over and over with his dong. We don't know if the Porsche was his. 2016. Professional Dutch person Kees van Voorst goes on TV to explain his ongoing polycule with 30 bicycles. 2024. D'Angelo Antoine Covington is re-jailed after publicly professing his love for a train seat in front of horrified onlookers. And my personal favorite, the 2018 incident of the Kansas man who wouldn't stop inserting himself into a tailpipe until he was tased into submission. But let's take a step back. Who's to say that these aren't just isolated incidents? How can we be sure that they're all connected to a singular fetish? What makes this fetish any different from the man who sexually enslaved his Sally Acorn doll? All the insight we need comes from the self-professed king of car coomers, the man who claims to have slept with over 1,000 vehicles since he was 15, Edward freaking Smith. And though these are cars, not planes, his reasoning might actually explain both. As a 57-year-old Smith explained in a 2008 interview, women simply don't interest him. At the time, Smith was in an open relationship with the Volkswagen Beetle, the Opel GT, and the Ford Ranger Splash. But his love affair started very early in his life. At 13, shortly after hitting puberty, he recalls experiencing an odd full-body sensation after he saw the Corvette Stingray for the first time. He knew there would be no going back. Since then, he's been unable to stop himself from kissing, hugging, and fondling cars that he finds attractive, even if they don't belong to him. Though to be clear, no one's inside when he does that. As he puts it, I appreciate beauty and I go a little bit beyond. I write poetry about cars, I sing to them and talk to them just like a girlfriend. I know what's in my heart and I have no desire to change. I'm not sick and I don't want to hurt anyone. Cars are just my preference. There are moments way out in the middle of nowhere where I see a little car parked and I swear it needs loving. There have been certain cars that attracted me and I would wait until nighttime, creep up to them, and just hug and kiss them. As far as women go, they never really interested me much, and I'm not gay. And he's not gay. And the list of IRL machine lovers is probably well over several thousand people now. But you may have noticed that there's a bit of a spectrum here. The aeromorph artwork is distinctly human, but even among plane lovers, there's a gradient between a plane that is mostly woman and a woman as embodied by any regular machine. Which leads us to the million-dollar question. What about this do people like? Welcome to a crash course in plane smut. On the most basic level, online coomers have always been obsessed with taking a concept or object and turning it into a pretty lady. And simply looking at some of the top posts on the Aeromorph subreddit, it's easy to see why. These planes are super curvaceous, with everything from shapely legs to stripper heels to piercings to a face full of makeup. They're mostly women with a coat of weather-resistant paint. As adult creator Maya Ben David explains about her popular airplane cosplay video, I have always found anthropomorphic objects very sexy and relatable. Their position as objects made for human use changes when they become alive, and I liked that tension. I liked the relationship of the anthroplane and pilot, at least in the fictions I have created. The anthroplane swallows the pilot and passengers and becomes pregnant with their baggage while carrying them around. And it's no coincidence that the majority of these planes are depicted as women. Planes are vessels. They represent an enormous threat, but they also physically cradle the life of the pilot and passengers within. There's something very womb-like about it, which is why it's no shock that a lot of Aeromorph enjoyers also overlap with the Vor and Macro communities. That is, those who enjoy the idea of being swallowed or interacting with a giant, respectively. And that's hardly where the crossover ends. Aeromorph artist Moser the Dozer believes that, quote, "The sleek aerodynamic shape of their heads and metallic skin invokes the same appeal as full-body latex suits." And he makes another unintuitive but absolutely correct observation. Fetishes like having oversized body parts, being inflated, being eaten alive, etc. are in a way much more practical for a being made of impenetrable steel than for a delicate being with skin and organs. These are fundamentally giant, dangerous, powerful women with enormous racks. And I think explained this way, it makes sense. But where it becomes an entirely different matter is in the case of our aforementioned car lovers. And there's really two levels to it: the guys born with it and the guys molded by it. For the latter group, it's easy to see how decades of watching car commercials where women sell you the idea of luxury and status could warp your brain. And as for the former group, these guys are purely in it for the mechanics. They find especially arousing the idea that a car or a plane can have an external body that anyone can touch, concealing intimate parts within. But they don't humanize their subject much at all, because a lot of them are what's known as mechanophiles. As psychologist Simone Nelson explains, some mechanophiles just like seeing how their object works. It's the tantalizing illusion of life that one can turn on or off. For some, it's the motion of the pistons thrusting, for others it's seeing fumes come out of the tailpipe, and so forth. Cold hard metal and sensual bodies, as a Vice article claims. And while there are cases every year where people get themselves stuck in tailpipes and washing machines and vacuum hoses, the distinguishing factor is this: are they obsessed with that feeling, or are they obsessed with the machine? When it comes to people like Edward Smith and Sarah Rodo, however, there remains one mysterious other explanation: objectum sexual. Which, fun fact, that term was invented by the woman who became famous for marrying the Eiffel Tower. Frustrated with people's lack of understanding, she came up with this word to explain her genuine lack of interest in human sexual connections. Like other objectum sexuals, she developed a deep and extremely emotional connection to the Eiffel Tower, viewing it as a consenting partner of equal status. While there's very little research into the sexuality at all, the consensus seems to be that it is not just a fetish. It's a legit orientation that actually affects a tiny percentage of the human race. And while there's even less research into that, scientists speculate that attraction to objects is overrepresented in people on the autism spectrum. And another group famously overrepresented on the spectrum? Furries. I told you we'd come back to this. The furry autism connection has been widely documented by members in and out of the community. And I bring this up because airplane lovers are so poorly understood that you can kind of only explain them in the context of other fetishes. Anthro, short for anthropomorphized, is a very well-established tradition in the furry art world, where artists confer human traits to subjects, usually in the form of eyes, mouths, hands, and various holes. Since the dawn of the internet and, ostensibly, the dawn of time, artists have been dreaming up voluptuous versions of everything from Windows 95 to sink dogs to entire countries. But as mentioned before, aeromorphs are deeply frowned upon in the furry community, which begs the question, what part of this, then, is furry. Anthroplanes, in spite of the fact that they are planes, embody so many of the same traits as Furry art and are so bafflingly different from any other subgenre of adult art that the furry porn sites just host it anyway. And if you don't believe me, just take a look at the hundreds of sexy anthroplanes on adult furry sites like E621. And that's partially because the great granddaddy of aeromorph art is himself a legendary furry. Since 2010, Walter William Sache, known also as W. Sache 007, has been creating highly sensual artwork of planes, cars, and horses wearing latex. And the more of his artwork you look at, the clearer the connection becomes between furries and aeromorphs. Some are much more distinctly jet-like, while others have hybrid animal features like beaks and clawed feet. And in one of the only comprehensive articles about aeromorphs that exists, W. Sache is credited as being the single biggest influence on this entire thing. And from the captions on his plane art alone, it's pretty clear to see what about this calls to him. Queen of the Skies, Goddess of Speed. As one may find her performance quite appealing, her presence of actions will indeed leave her enemies lost in their grief of shame. For no one and no man may ever catch up to her. Magnificent beauty who flies and dwells among the skies. Not now, not ever. And unfortunately, outside of W. Sache, several moderators on the Aeromorph subreddit, and ragebait articles by the Daily Mail, we know nearly nothing else about this elusive community. The only thing we as observers can go off is the testimony of plane lovers themselves. In their small Reddit community, users proclaim their affinity for their plane foos. That is, airplane waifus, and express a desire to turn some of these planes white with their bodily fluids. But others genuinely find them cute and take an intense fascination with their inner workings in a somewhat non-sexual way. Individually, all of these factors come together into the aeromorph fetish. Planes, machines, anthro-furry traits, submission to a giant being. As one journalist so succinctly put it, there's something innocent about it all, despite it literally being smut. It's like a childhood obsession with airplanes, all grown up. At very least, the aeromorph fetish shows a veneration for the majesty of aircraft. It just helps that the planes have giant bazongas too. So to put a bow on this, does the aeromorph fetish actually hurt anyone? Online? No. In real life, a little bit, depending on how tantalizing you personally find a nice tailpipe. But out of all the controversial DeviantArt fetishes, this is arguably one of the least understood and least harmful. But it's probably for the best that this doesn't take off. This has been the Freaky Files. So about aeromorphs, real quick. Aeromorphs are actually considered a part of the furry community just because they do not have enough anthropomorphic overlap with like any other weird subgenre of art, and I use weird only as relative to normal, but they don't have enough overlap with any other category of thing to be categorized that way. So for this reason, they are somewhat embraced by furries. Now originally when I uploaded this video, I had very little to there was very little editorializing about aeromorphs in general, and I went on Reddit and I just looked them up and I looked up what people had to say about it, and I originally came away with the impression that furries are no fans of aeromorphs, or, you know, they don't associate with them, but I have since had the opportunity to speak to a lot of them one-on-one, aeromorphs, or aeromorph fetishists rather, and it would turn out that that's not true. You know, that's just Reddit people being Reddit people, and we all know how I feel about Redditors. So I actually cut out a little bit of material in this video just because I did not want to keep the framing that was no longer correct.